Thanks for joining us today for Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our Webinar Wednesday program. We are coming to you live from Washington, D.C. Our webinars are every Wednesday and are provided complimentary. They're recorded and can be downloaded from our website and YouTube channel, which now holds over 300 of our government contracting webinars. In the interest of time, we do not take questions, so if you have questions for our speaker, we will have his information on the last slide of the presentation today. A special thanks to our educational sponsor, the National Veterans Small Business Coalition, for making these webinars possible. The NVSBC is the largest nonprofit trade association for veterans. Please visit their website for more information. Okay, and now a little bit about us. We work with U.S. federal government contractors, including product, service, and software firms. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles and compliance. More information is on our website. We also have opportunities for your organization to advertise in our newsletter. We now reach over 21,000 subscribers, and this includes both contractors and government. Contact us for pricing information with the email shown on the screen. Okay, and now to introduce our speaker, Michael Mertz. Welcome, Michael. We are glad to have you here with us today, and I'll now turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Hunter. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the introduction and opportunity to present today on this often overlooked topic, GSA schedule, risks versus reward. This is the fourth part of a 5-segment series on the GSA schedules contract. Let me start by stating up front that GSA schedules are not for everyone, and by no means are they a silver bullet. If you've been following along with the previous webinars that have been presented, you'll know that the GSA schedules are quite complicated. They're difficult to manage, and there's a tremendous amount of reward once you successfully enter into the contracts and you get started. But getting into the contracts is quite costly, or can be costly, and fraught with lots of work, some letdowns. So let's kind of get through some of these risks and rewards. In the next 20 minutes or so, we'll discuss these topics, and then if there are any questions, as Hunter indicated, you can always follow up with me directly after the webinar. Hunter, next slide, please. So on this slide, you'll just see some of the areas that we're going to go through today with the risks and the rewards. From my perspective, there are many risks that need to be identified and managed when contemplating a GSA contract. We'll go through some of the risks, including the initial or upfront investment cost, the ongoing cost of maintaining a GSA contract, minimum sales requirements and pricing considerations, industrial funding fees, aka usury fees for using the services, debriefs, and the most worrisome of all, the all for naught scenario. The rewards are a little easier to quantify than the risks. We'll talk about the sheer size of the federal government space under or within GSA. We'll talk about contract standardization, credit risk, and accounts receivable turnover. Next slide, please. This is not a complete list of risks nor rewards. However, there are some of the most prevalent items to consider when deciding on whether or not to get a schedules contract. Each item needs to be thoroughly considered to ensure that you can identify, mitigate, and prepare a plan of action early on. Additionally, throughout today's webinar, I'll talk or attempt to break these risks down by sales type between service and product sales-based vendors. For each, there are both similar and unique risks that have to be considered. I recognize that there have been several webinars on the schedules, and I've tried not to be redundant in the information being presented today. If you're serious about the schedules and have not been able to participate in the other GSA webinars presented by Jennifer Schaus and Associates, I highly recommend going to their website, downloading and listening to the previously recorded webinars. There's a wealth of good information on the GSA schedules. The initial investment. Are you ready to be a schedule holder? Are you ready to invest significant time, resources, money, energy, and spirit into the sales strategy that could take years before becoming profitable? Do you have the patience and resolve to see it through? GSA contracts can be rewarding, can be profitable, and can be transformative to a business, but it doesn't happen overnight. First and foremost, to be awarded a schedules contract, you must have a minimum of 2 years experience for each special item number or SIN that you are applying for. GSA recommends that companies that lack federal experience first try to get that experience as a subcontractor to a prime contractor doing business with the federal government. It's not impossible to get a contract without having federal experience. However, as I'll point out later on, once you obtain the contract, it becomes really difficult to get the contracts without the experience. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Additionally, as we will discuss, whether you are a product sales company or service-based enterprise, you have to be really good at what you do to get on a schedules contract. Not only do you need experience, you also need to have proper financing to be able to offer the items and or services to the government at often heavily discounted rates, and with payment almost always coming after the fact. The margins are slim, and you will always be competing with companies who are willing to undercut you to get the contract. After deciding that you are financially prepared, well-funded, and have the experience necessary, you have to consider the cost. GSA schedule contracts can be very expensive and time-consuming to obtain. The process is not easy and takes a considerable amount of time. Preparing for the submission, including data collection and proposal writing, the dreaded wait that occurs after the proposal submission, waiting for the government to review what you've sent in, and then the hurry up and respond to the government inquiries after they've started their review. The process can take anywhere from 3 to 18 months typically to get a base award. And trust me, the 3 months is highly unlikely. And after the base award, it takes most companies, especially service-based companies, an additional 6 to 18 months or longer to make their first sale or their required $25,000 in sales. During the process and throughout the contract life, you must be cognizant of the government's deadlines. They tend to be very rigid and are typically enforced without regard to the potential impact to the company. Remember, it is the government, it is bureaucratic in nature, and yes, they take a one-size-fits-all approach. While it is possible for a company to obtain a schedule contract on their own without consultants, even GSA recommends getting a consultant at least the first time. Depending on the size and complexity of your company, your services and or products, the upfront consulting fee can be in the tens of thousands of dollars. There are a myriad of companies able to help and advertise and try to solicit the ability to get you on a schedules contract. However, like most industries, there are many that prey on the vulnerable and might take your hard-earned money and not deliver what was promised. Only use companies that specialize in GSA schedules and who have been recommended by your colleagues, possibly through professional associations you're a member of, entities that you're able to find and verify through discussion boards that you trust, or even possibly through your local PTAC. Another requirement to get on a scheduled contract is to have prepared financial statements. Why is this a risk? Well, this may not be an issue for some companies who already have financial statements prepared for their bank or their lending institution. However, for everyone else, this may be an additional cost and additional time added to the already long timeline, as companies often don't realize the need for the financial statements until late in the process. And then they have to either hire an accountant or engage an accountant to prepare the financial statements. And that just adds to both the complexity and the time of getting the schedules contract. Hunter, next slide, please. Okay. Ongoing administrative and compliance costs. The base contract has significant contract clauses, and for anybody who's not aware, clauses are really just, conditions that you have to adhere to be compliant with your contract. There's quarterly reporting requirements, and now more than ever, there are IT requirements. So let's talk about some of the contract clauses. And, after being awarded a base contract, and even before being awarded a task order, as a GSA schedule holder, you are required to comply with all the clauses found in the base contract. Clauses such as hanging posters in a certain room, or not using certain equipment, or confidentiality rules. I mean, the clauses go on and on and on and on and on. It's a good idea to have a legal savvy person on staff to read and digest all the clauses before the contract signing. Have all those clauses briefed, summarized, and make that available for your IT, for your HR, legal, marketing, accounting, and every other internal department in your company, as literally there is a clause for everyone in the GSA schedules. Contractors must file their quarterly reports even if they don't have any sales. Failure to file the mandatory quarterly reports will be a mark against you when it's time to re-up your contract. Remember, the initial contract is 5 years with 3 options of additional 5 years, each potentially making this a 20-year contract. In that, there are tremendous IT requirements with most any government contracts, GSA schedules not being any different, especially now with the issues we are facing with foreign adversaries and espionage. Entering into government contracts requires you to certify that your system meets certain standards. This webinar is not here to discuss what those standards are, other than to know that you're required to ensure that your IT system meets those standards, and there's a cost in doing that. It's best to make sure your IT staff are thoroughly versed in the rules. It would be an awful thing to lose a contract due to IT non-compliance. And conversely, it is also equally daunting to spin up a compliant IT system only to find out you didn't get the contract. In any event, it requires due diligence on your part. Hunter, next slide, please. The minimum sales and industrial funding fee. You must have at least $25,000 in sales within the first 2 years. You must maintain at least $25,000 in sales every year after. There's a funding fee of 0.75%, which we'll discuss, and which is the fee that kind of keeps GSA running. For those of you who were able to log in last week, Jennifer did a great job of detailing the price negotiations. In her presentation, she hit on price as being one of the most important aspects to consider when entering into a GSA schedule, and it is for product sales-based vendors. However, for service companies, while price is important, the more important aspect is experience. In any event, once you have been successfully awarded the base contract, you must start making sales to the government as soon as possible. If you do not sell $25,000 in the first 2 years of either sales or products on your schedule, GSA can cancel your contract. Even after the first $25,000, you must then continue to sell a minimum of $25,000 each year thereafter, or face a similar possibility of cancellation or non-exercising of the option at the 5-year renewal. The reason for the minimum sales requirements is that the GSA MAS Multiple Award Schedule program is almost entirely funded through the industrial funding fee, which is a usury fee that the contractor pays to the government to use the government systems, in this case, eBuy and GSA Advantage. The fee is 0.75%, and is required to be built into your lowest cost pricing that is approved prior to contract award. Contract administration costs money, and GSAs determine that if they can't earn at least $187 on each of their schedule holders, then they're not worth the cost of managing, and they're probably right. However, imagine spending thousands of dollars on consultants, thousands of dollars on internal cost and time, and who knows how much on website development, marketing, compliance, etc., to get awarded a scheduled contract, and then lose the contract in 2 years if you're not able to get at least $25,000 in sales. When looking at this through, this lens or scope, this is a real consideration, probably the most important consideration the company has to consider before spending the money, investing the time and the effort into obtaining a GSA schedules contract. What is the likelihood that you can meet this $25,000 threshold each year? For if you're selling products, you need to figure out how many products you would need to sell to the government to hit that threshold. You also need to think about your profit margins and the heavily discounted fees that you're going to provide to the government, and whether or not with that can you manage these minimum sales requirements. And then for service-based companies, while it's not hard to get to 25,000 in any one contract, getting that first contract and then getting follow-on contracts can prove to be very difficult for newcomers to the federal sphere. Hunter, next slide, please. Debriefs. So I don't know how many of you know what debriefs are, or why you might, or why I considered them to be a risk. So let me kind of go through it. When you're doing business with the federal government in a typical negotiated type contract, something you would find on the old Fed BizOps Beta SAM, when you enter into that solicitation and you give a quote or a proposal and you put all that time and effort into it, once the government names the successful bidder, and let's just say it's not you, you have the opportunity to go back to the government and say, why didn't I get the contract? What was right about my competition's submission that wasn't right with mine? Or, did I do well in some areas and maybe not in others? So there's a lot of information that the government can and is required to give you in a regular contract debriefing. We recommend to our clients, that you get a debrief whether you win the contract or whether you don't win the contract. Some people say, well, I won the contract, why do I need a debrief? And the answer simply is so that you can learn more about how you can do it better next time. But back to why is it a risk in the GSA contracts? Well, in the federal acquisition regulations that cover the multiple award schedules, it specifically states that debriefings are not required. So what does that mean for you? It means that you can spend months, years, every time a proposal or a solicitation comes in and you say, hey, my company, we can do that work. And then you spend all the time, you gear up, you put together a proposal or a quote, you go through it, you may even hire consultants to help you manage it, and your first time around, you send it in, you don't get the contract, it's awarded to somebody else. You go to the GSA or you go to the contracting officer for whoever their procurement command is, and you say, hey, why didn't I win? What was good about the competition, or what was bad about me? And you'll be lucky if you get your price was too high, your price was too low, or a particular part of your quote or submission was disqualified for some reason. In other words, they're not required to give you any real information. They can tell you a couple different things about your proposal, but they're not required to. And what that does is, if the only business you're doing with the federal government is through the GSA schedules, what you'll find is it's very hard to learn how to do it right if you're not getting feedback along the way. So this is where consultants come in very, early on when you're doing, work with the government, because it's a whole new way of doing things. So consultants, if they're worth their weight and they've been down, the road a couple times, they'll be able to kind of lead you down a path where common errors that you can avoid that you didn't even know existed. But anyways, back to the debriefs. In a GSA contract, you won't get a debrief. So just a consideration when you're contemplating the GSA schedule, again, if you don't have previous federal experience, you might want to wait to jump into the GSA. Go get as much experience as you can in the federal I'll call it the federal marketplace, not in the schedules contracts. Then once you're prepared to do business with the federal government and you have success doing business with the federal government, then is a good opportunity to come back to the GSA schedules, relook at them, and say, okay, now's the time. Hunter, next slide, please. Okay, the all for naught scenario. Assuming you get the base contract, the hard part is done, right? Well, not really. Now you have to compete for each order. In a schedules contract, when you get awarded the schedule, it's really like an IDIQ type contract, right? An indefinite delivery or indefinite quantity type contract. Basically, it's just the government saying, we've put you on a pre-approved vendor list. Now, every time we have a need, you can come in and bid on that need, but only you and everyone else who's on the schedule can bid on that need. So you have to go and compete for each order based on price, based on experience, depending on if you're product or service based. And you can do everything right and still not be awarded an order after getting in the schedules contract. If you're a product sales company, the GSA, in GSA, it's all about price, right? Just like Jennifer said last week, assuming products are homogenous, right? That, different companies can sell the same thing. So you have to be willing to sell with very low margins with hopes of selling more. However, the slim margins are often really difficult for contractors to both live with and grow with, which kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. When you are contemplating the GSA schedule, if you're a product sales company, can you afford to sell these products to the government and with the cost of compliance with the government contract, while at the same time barely absorbing your costs and having very low or slim margins? It's not a good way, or it's not a proven way to grow. It's very difficult with those types of margins to be able to expand your business further. Now, if you're a if you've been in business for a decade and you're highly experienced in your sales and in your marketplace, and coming then into the GSA schedules when you have other customers, you're not just relying on one thing or putting all your eggs in one basket, then your other customers can absorb more cost. While the GSA, that the margins might be slim, it keeps everybody working. So as long as you can diversify your customer base, in product sales, GSA becomes a pretty good marketplace, but it can't be your only marketplace, especially in the beginning. It'd be very difficult to manage that. If you're a service-based company, most first-time schedule holders will tell you that they jumped in way too fast, that they should have waited. The schedules contract is not a great place to get your feet wet. Unlike product sales companies, service-based orders are more often than not awarded as best value to the government, where the government puts less emphasis on cost and more emphasis on previous history. If you're selling Dell computers, to the government, a Dell computer is a Dell computer, right? You're going to negotiate on price and probably delivery schedules. However, when you're talking about service contracts, whether they be an IT help desk, accounting services, engineering services, whatever the professional service might be, or even custodial services, when you're offering those services to the government, the government really wants to know, have you done business with the government before? If you haven't, then they want to know, well, how can I trust you? Right? I'm a contracting officer. I have hundreds of contracts that I'm responsible for. I don't have time to get to know you as a contractor. I want to know that somebody else has already did all that work and that I can trust you and you're a good contractor, right? So it all goes back to prior experience. It doesn't have to be federal experience. It could be state experience. It can be commercial experience. But from my personal experience and from my clients' experience, often they're looking for federal experience. They just want to know that you've done work with the federal government, that you've been compliant with the federal government rules and all the different clauses, which is certainly different than what you would see in a commercial relationship or and even sometimes with state and local governments. So if you're a service-based company and you have experience and you're ready to jump in, then you need to take that as a consideration. You can spend all this money, get a schedules contract for whatever service you provide, and then even if you might have 50 years experience providing this service outside of the federal government. However, once you get into you get the schedules contract, and that's your first, soiree into federal government acquisition and procurement, and you don't know how to write a proposal. You don't know all the different clauses that the government needs or wants or that you have to be compliant with, or in each solicitation, the government states they want previous federal experience, right? That could be a real challenge for you. Having spent all this money, having geared up for a GSA schedules contract, having been awarded the contract, having been compliant with all the IT and record keeping requirements and everything else, and then you start, looking at the solicitations as they come through eBuy, and you realize I'm not qualified to do any of these contracts. And it might not even be that you're not truly qualified, but the government has put into their solicitations a requirement that you've done work with the federal government before, or a requirement, that you've followed these federal criteria before. And if you haven't, then you can't even submit a proposal or a quote for those services. So now you've spent all this money and all this time, 2-3 years have gone by, and you now realize, I don't know if I can do any work for the federal government unless I go and become a subcontractor first and get some federal experience, and then I can go back. But remember, you already have your schedules contract. You're already at your requirement for your 25,000. You might not have the time to go get that experience after you get the contract. So for service-based companies, more so than product-based companies, this is truly one of those things that you have to consider before jumping in. Do you have what it takes to perform on a federal contract using federal rules? And trust me, just because you've done it on the outside doesn't mean that the federal government will consider it on the inside. Hunter, next slide, please. Okay. Marketplace access. So this is one of the benefits. All right, I've spent a lot of time talking about the risks of GSA. Right, there is a tremendous amount of risk going into it. It's a strategy. It takes years to develop and become profitable, but it can be profitable. So everyone knows that the federal government is the largest single buyer in the country. The GSA schedules are worth billions and billions of dollars. I don't know exactly. I think it's more than 20% of the federal discretionary spending goes through a GSA contract. So getting on a scheduled contract has the potential to open up vast marketplaces that just simply aren't available to non-schedule holders. However, there are a lot of schedule holders. There could be hundreds of thousands of companies that are selling the same products that you are and that you're competing for in that same space. Don't be fooled by the vastness of the numbers, by the amount of the zeros, that is spent through GSA. As stated earlier, GSA truly is all about price when selling products. I mean, their whole existence is to try to get products to the federal government from vendors at the cheapest, lowest price. Therefore, the only way to do well with GSA is to sell a lot. And with access to GSA Advantage, the government's form of Amazon, the potential could be amazing, but you have to stay grounded. Know, again, that there's hundreds, thousands of companies competing for the same contracts you are. So it's not that silver bullet. It's not like, hey, I got on the contract, now I'm going to be awarded, 3% of all the sales, right? You have to still compete for every dollar sold to the government. Success with GSA is truly about quantity. You have to sell more to make more. As with any government purchasing vehicle, the scheduled contracts can be very good marketing tools. They look great on your website, on your capability statement that says that you have a GSA schedule. And also, by having a GSA schedule, even if you're not doing work in the GSA schedule, it helps you do business with other federal entities that are not purchasing through GSA, because just by having that emblem on your capability statement, it tells other buyers, and not just federal buyers, but state buyers as well, that you've been pre-qualified, if you will, to do this type of work for the federal government, for GSA. And that in itself is an accomplishment. You'll see when you start the process. But having said that, from a marketing perspective, GSA holds true value. It's a name that is highly recognized in the contracting world, not just the federal government, obviously. So if you can obtain it and it makes sense and it works for your strategy, it also becomes a very good marketing ploy as well. Hunter, next slide, please. Thank you. Standardized buying process. So this is kind of a risk and a reward, right? So it's a reward for product sales, and it's a risk for service companies. And let me explain a little bit further. So when you're using the GSA Advantage to bring your products to the GSA marketplace, it's a very standardized process for the most part. And it's very easy to, put your bids in, your quotes in, make sales, make your deliveries, and so on and so forth. And with standardization is efficiency, right? So the more sales that you can produce this way, the more efficient the process is, and you're not running through different hoops for different customers that you might be doing on the commercial side. So standardization is a good thing. However, there's a true difference in GSA schedules when it's between products and services. As I said earlier, or a couple times now, products are truly based on price, right? Services are based on experience. And the problem that I see with GSA services is you go through this entire process to qualify for the schedule for whatever your service is. that you offer. And they go through and they check your previous history, and they check, they get customer recommendations, and they do all this work. They ask you for your licenses, they ask you for your resumes, and they really try to verify every aspect of your history, your everything. And then they get you on a schedules contract. The solicitation comes through from a contracting officer for a service-based contract. And what's the first thing that the officer asks for you to do? To provide your licenses, to provide your resumes, and to prove why you're experienced to do the job. I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to me. I always thought that for the GSA services, that once you got past the schedule piece of the base contract, that the solicitations would be more based on price and delivery, meaning, how fast you could deliver the professional services, how many people you had on staff, could you staff what was necessary. I didn't think that, contract holders would have to go back and redo and reprove each time their experience, but that is how it works. Okay, Hunter, next slide, please. Okay. Payment. So this is, I have put this in the rewards, right? The pros of the GSA contract. I believe that part of doing business with the federal government is that there is almost zero credit risk, right? The federal government often does not default on its payments. Now, that's not to say that they're always timely in paying their payments, or that they can't make you jump through hoops to get your payments. But unlike commercial sales, where every time you make a sale on credit, you always have to wonder whether or not you're going to get that payment in the future. When you're dealing with the federal government, specifically, through GSA, and you're doing products, as long as you deliver as indicated, you should get paid timely. However, if you provide defects or shortages or any other events that might trigger a rejection or a withhold, you should change your title to doctor, right? As you'll need a lot of patience, as it could take months or even years to fully recover your billing. So the idea here is to deliver on your contracts the way you were contracted to deliver. For service-based companies, the when and how much of payments will be addressed in your contract, in your individual task order contracts. Again, as long as you perform well, the payments usually flow well too. However, it's the government, and there's always the potential for delays. But as I said, rarely are there ever defaults. Hunter, next slide, please. Okay, so I'm at my conclusion. Right, we've talked about some of the pros and cons of the GSA schedule contracts, and I started off with saying that GSA schedule contracts are not for everyone, and that's pretty much how I'm going to close as well. It's a great vehicle, but it really is for companies that have experience, have an understanding of the federal purchasing environment. I don't recommend anybody jumping into GSA thinking that this is their way into the federal government. Companies must be ready to jump in, because if they jump in too soon, they could waste considerable amounts of money that could have been used elsewhere in the company to generate sales. There is a real opportunity cost when contemplating the GSA schedule. For the amount of money that you're going to spend internally and through consultants and everything else in GSA, you could be taking that same money and applying it in some other marketing strategy, or maybe improving some aspects of your company to help you get other contract awards. So when considering this, you definitely need to consider the opportunity cost. You must perform your due diligence and not be blinded by the zeros at the end of the government spending. I mean, it's not all yours, so you have to take that in consideration. I want to take this opportunity to thank each of you for logging in, Hunter for hosting the webinar, and everyone at Jennifer Schaus and Associates for making these webinars a possibility and making them happen. Have a great rest of your week, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Michael, for a great presentation and sharing your time with us today. And thanks to everyone who joined us, like Michael said, and the recording will be on our website and YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. So make sure to look out for that. And please join us this Friday as we cover each part of the FAR, and join us next Wednesday for more hot topics in federal contracting. Thank you, everyone.